in a family affected by addiction and mental health. I grew up not really feeling very safe.
Welcome everyone to the Mind.Set Podcast. Today we've got Jon with us, Jon Rees. Jon, really glad to be here with you, really excited to speak to you. This is a Mind.Set Podcast, so this is where we talk about all things embracing adversity for positive change and people's journeys, and I'm very excited and very much looking forward to hearing a bit more about yours. Our paths have crossed very briefly. You came and kindly did a bit of a discussion and an exhibition for us at a charity art exhibition we did here at FRP a few months back. But perhaps a good starting point for us is you could just introduce yourself and let us know sort of a bit about what you've done or what you're doing today with your life.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Jon Rees. I am a photographer predominantly, but a big part of what I do is run therapeutic photography workshops, so sort of well-being photography groups with different charities and organisations and a little bit of corporate stuff. Yeah, that's kind of what I mostly do today.
Very good. And that's it's a fascinating starting point. So therapeutic photography workshops. We got connected through the charity, The Connection, which is a homeless charity. What's some of the work you do with The Connection, and what is some of the work, and we'll get to some of your backstory in a minute, but what is some of the work around the therapeutics photography that you do, and what drives that passion? How did you end up doing what you're doing?
I mean, personal experience of homelessness, street homelessness, but I kind of, with The Connection, I met someone who worked there. He did my course, and then he said, this might work really well within the organisation, and then it started from there. So it started about 3 years ago, and I tailor it to depending on the organisation and the group that I'm working with, but with those guys, we have a few cameras, and once a week we go out on a photography walk together. So we'll have a chat first. We'll maybe talk about a theme or look at the work of a photographer, and then we'll go out for an hour, take some photos, and then we'll come back to the centre and we'll kind of connect the memory cards to a big TV, and we'll look at the photos together, and we'll just have a chat about what we found and that's kind of it, really. You know, it's simply the act of, going out as a group for that hour, not being a group of homeless guys, being a group of photographers. Yeah. So sort of stepping into a different identity for an hour. Yeah. Focusing on the visual kind of, it's like a visual meditation, really. Focusing on what's around us rather than what we're thinking about, what we're worrying about, what we're regretting. So it's kind of, it just works from that perspective, really. Yeah. And then we had an exhibition in Charing Cross Station, Christmas before last, which was great, which was an opportunity for the guys to come in and show off the work that they'd made throughout the course.
And so tying back into that, and because you talked about there very briefly that you've got your own experience with homelessness, and I guess going back to the start of your journey, can you just explain a bit about what has brought you to the point and I guess to the person you are today and why you're doing it?
Yeah, there's a lot.
I bet.
There's a lot. Yeah. I mean, a sort of a brief history would be growing up in a family like very much affected by addiction and mental health. Right. So dad had bipolar, was also an addict. Right. Mum was mentally unwell, probably due to the fact of being, in that scenario. So it was kind of, it was all around me, really. There's schizophrenia in the family, there's addiction all over the place. So, I grew up, not really feeling very safe, I think, not due to anyone's fault, but just that's the way it was, I didn't feel safe. I didn't really, find it easy to find a place in the world. I also had undiagnosed sort of neurodivergence, which, nobody knew about that stuff back then, really. It's just, you're not trying hard enough. And so there were many reasons why, by 13, I was struggling. By then my dad had passed away through his addiction, possibly a suicide. So, I had a lot of confusion, anger, and so I went down the path of kind of drinking and using drugs from 13, which when I think about it now is really sad,
Yeah.
to think of a 13-year-old, putting substances into his body and, when he should have been playing and, doing whatever. So, and that eventually culminated in street homelessness. It took a while to get there. There was a lot of partying and the rave scene and everything, but, eventually, I just, I had no denial left. I was, sleeping in a doorway and, just, thinking, well, this is where it ends, really. Yeah.
And you talked a bit there around the neurodivergence and, the feedback being, well, you're not trying hard enough. Do you remember as a kid what that was like? Obviously, I assume it's confusing to say the least, but
yeah, because I now have kids of my own. My eldest is autistic; he has a diagnosis of autism, and through the fight that I've been on for him, getting him the support that he needs, I've really kind of revisited how it was for me. It's like when other people seem to find. I knew I was intelligent on some level. I knew that I had intelligent thoughts, creative thoughts. Right. I understood concepts. I could explain stuff verbally very well. But you put a blank page in front of me and it all just got very confusing and difficult.
Right.
So, it was like, my journey with supporting Alfie, my son, has really taught me a lot about my own experience and how, I just thought, well, everybody keeps talking to me like I'm stupid, so I kind of give up.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
So So I guess at that point, by the time you're 13, it's just a case of, well, what's the point? Because you had no other figure in your life to show you any other way, I guess.
No, not really.
Yeah.
Dad was gone, Mum was depressed and grieving, and and it was. Yeah, you're kind of told, you're the man of the house now, and you sort of man up and get on with it, so I kind of, I went off the rails, because I couldn't cope. I couldn't cope with, the responsibilities of life without any kind of blueprint on how to kind of navigate my way through them.
Yeah, or perhaps from my experience, a big part of being sober and navigating sobriety was learning to have a support structure and actually being shown that it's all right to ask for help and all that. Like, if you'd never had that, then what it doesn't really come into your mind as an option, bizarrely. If your ego doesn't allow it, and when so how long were you homeless for in the end?
I was homeless for about 2 years. About 2 years.
And was that just in London, or?
Yeah, I mean, I say that. I'd been homeless previously in other countries. Right. So I'd kind of done geographicals, as you say, just to, I thought if I change the scenery, if I get away, maybe life will get easier and better. But I just ended up living in a car park in France and living in squatting in a bulb factory in Holland, just became homeless in those places as well. So it was like, properly, I think of my time in London on the streets as, really kind of, being street homeless, down and out, sort of having no kind of hope left, So.
And what do you think? This might be an odd question, but what do you think kept you alive and kept you going at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, I think that what I realise now is that there's just a life force that is not even connected to my ideas of whether I want to be alive or not. It just kept keeping me alive. Yeah. And I really didn't want to be alive. I mean, I made several attempts to bring that into reality, but I have this life force which just seemed to keep me going and wouldn't let me go until I could tap into a sort of a light a flicker of light, which was like maybe what life's worth living.
Right.
You know, which took like 2 years.
And how old were you when you hit that rock bottom at the end of that 2-year period?
34.
34.
Yeah, well, 33 when I first kind of asked for help, like properly, asked for help, and then 34 when I first started to really receive help.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and what I find really fascinating about these kind of stories and that kind of incidents is that's at the really extreme end of the scale, which, my story I can relate to an extent. I wasn't homeless, but I had the same feelings. But you could zoom that all the way into the other end of the scale and the problem could be smaller. But what's interesting is the way out of the problem is somewhat the same. It's how do you ask for help and how do you then start the next chapter.
Yeah.
So in your case, what changed for you to be able to ask for help, and then what actually happened practically for you to get off the streets?
So I by then I was in a hostel in Shepherd's Bush, which was like a harm minimalisation hostel. So it was a place where people could use drugs and drink until they stopped.
Right.
Until they died.
Exactly. Oh right. Okay.
I mean, there was very few.
Right.
There was very few people getting help. I mean,
Right.
Obviously that was on the menu, but
Right.
most people that ended up in there, were not even open to that idea. So, and nor was I. And then, for some reason, as I say, this little flicker of, it's like this other kind of voice came in that was like, maybe you can still salvage a life here. Maybe it's, I just thought it was over. I thought, I'll just be here for a few months until my body gives up.
Yeah.
But, something kind of sparked, a little spark, which said, maybe there's a way out. Maybe there's a life worth having. And that's when I went to the staff and just said, look, I'd like to try and address, addiction and see, if I can step, for me, it was like a big dark sort of nothingness in front of me, like the idea of life without alcohol and drugs, without the things that have kept me, my solution, they'd been for, a long time. And so, it was like, can I take the first steps into that darkness and that unknown and see what it's like for me, whether I can, so that, and then that's when the help came, the right people turned up, the right support arrived, and I was sort of carried off literally into a detox and then a rehab.
And sober ever since then?
Yeah. I was 21 years clean last Wednesday.
Huge congrats.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I've been sober clean ever since, which blows my mind.
Yeah. In that period of time, what do you think your biggest lesson is that you took away from those last few years of homelessness?
I think that you never know what's around the corner. Sort of depression and addiction, is very much about the same. It's like I will predict kind of the future based on my worst experiences. So it's like, this will happen, that will happen. It's, and like that, that turnaround taught me that, you never know what's possible, what's around the corner, It's not even what's possible or what's around the corner, how you're going to feel. You might, be on the edge of a train platform, one day and think there's no hope, there's nothing left for me. And then 2 weeks later, you might feel completely different or different enough,
Yeah.
So it's like that. That's kind of what it taught me, and that's what I always say to people who are, talking about, feeling like there's got nowhere to go. Is that you never know how you're going to feel in a week, a month.
Yeah, and I can relate to that. I was actually having a similar conversation recently around you just never know what good's around the corner. And last year I very much had a year or two halves in terms of my mental health journey and other positive stuff that happened in my life. And I thought that exact thought, if you had said to me a week before that the positive stuff started to happen, that I just wouldn't have believed it, and you never know. Because I think a lot of with humans, with us, with the human condition is whenever we're stressed or back up against the wall or overwhelmed, it's all a game of perception, isn't it? And then it's like, well, how can I get out of this? And someone wired in your way, and certainly in my way, will be more disposed to that issue, but we all have it to an extent. So even if you're dealing with something stressful at work, it's like, well, actually, is this going to matter at 8 p.m. tonight? Which is something I started saying to myself to better manage my emotions,
Yeah.
So it sounds like a very similar approach. So you then got sober at 34, and then what happened there? You went to rehab. You came out of rehab.
Yeah, came out of rehab. Came back to London. I was in like another hostel. I was in a Salvation Army, so it wasn't ideal. I was kind of, there were people around me still using drugs, and
Right.
and it was kind of, didn't feel very homely. So I used to walk a lot. I just used to walk, and I had this head full of kind of, fears about the future, worries about the past. I hadn't really built a support network at that point, and it was around that time there was a charity that I used to go to, and they asked me to do a sponsored walk, and I took some photos. They gave me a camera to take some photos on the sponsored walk. And when I got back and showed them the photos, they said, "Oh, these are good. Maybe you should hang on to this camera."
Right.
And that's when I started to kind of walk with the camera. So I just carried on walking, but with the camera, and the camera became like my mindfulness tool. I didn't really understand it as that at the time, but I would get lost in the visuals, get lost in the reflections, and the way light was bouncing off things, and colours, and just the overlapping kind of tapestry of the street, and kind of fell in love with it from there, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you put around you a support structure? Like, how did you get through those initial years or months when you're in that environment? Because obviously that sounds incredibly hard when you're trying to live a new sober life, but you're surrounded by old behaviour.
Yeah.
How did you get through that?
Well, eventually, not immediately, but eventually I found like 12-step fellowships, and
Right.
and I kind of found my support through there. I mean, yeah, I resisted that to start, and and it wasn't, I wanted to do it my way. I wanted to build my own like recovery program, but
Right.
I found myself in a very lonely place doing that. So eventually I found that, and that kind of gave me the structure and the strength to kind of, to start to build a life, and from there I kind of, I started to do some evening classes, and then I ended up at Central St Martin's School of Art doing a fine art degree.
Right.
Almost like, I say this a bit flippantly, but it was pretty much accidentally. That wasn't the plan.
Right.
I started to do a few courses, and then people said, "Oh, you should do this," and then I ended up on a foundation course, and then realised halfway through that meant that you had to apply to university.
Oh,
I
right.
didn't know any of this stuff. I'd
Right.
left school, I didn't go to college or anything. I just
Yeah.
left school and got a job. So I'd never been through any of this process. And so I found myself, by now I was like 36, sort of studying art full time, which was, amazing.
And how did that fit? How did that period of your life fit in comparison to the period of your life where the feedback was, well, you just need to try harder, and everything else?
Well, that's when I first kind of went on a journey around neurodivergence, and
Right.
started to understand, why, I struggled to not understand, but to organise information. So
Right.
it was like I understood. I could sit in a lecture or a seminar and understand everything that was being said and be really interested in it and have opinions on it. But then organising that information into an essay just felt impossible. So
Right.
that's when I asked for support, and that's when I first sort of started to understand, that I was neurodivergent, and with the right support, I could succeed. And I ended up getting an award for my dissertation, off the back of
Wow.
just getting some support in place and understanding how my brain works.
So, and just expanding on that a little bit, in case there is anyone listening that has experience with it or is wrestling with it. What does neurodivergence actually mean for you, and what was the way in which you got enough help to get you to that point of an award-winning dissertation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I went on to work in that kind of area for a while, so I'm still learning. I mean, we're all still learning. I think as society, what neurotypical and what neurodivergent is, and I don't think there are many people that are completely neurotypical. But I think that it's not about people, but it's about the way structures and systems are created in a certain way to suit a certain type of brain. And if your brain doesn't work that way, you're going to struggle.
Right.
But you don't know why. If you don't have the diagnosis, you don't know why you're struggling. You just think, have I got bad concentration? Do I just not understand things? Am I just disorganized? It's all this kind of, this everyday stuff that, once you kind of start to understand, why you find those things difficult, and also tap into resources that other people have used to understand how to organise those tasks and how to do those things, then you can achieve whatever you want, really. It's like it's about the systems and the structures. As long as they're in place, we're disabled, if you like, by society, not by our brains or bodies. We're disabled by an inaccessible environment.
And what does that? How do you take the information that's in your head and formulate it in a way where you can get the communication out onto a page, which enables someone to then mark that and give you a grade?
Yeah.
What's that process and that filter?
So for me, I started colour coding everything. So I would have different sources for my dissertation, and I would colour code them. I'd have everything all in one document, colour coded, and then I'd find my own voice. That was a key. It was finding my voice, which linked it all together.
Right.
My personal experiences, my opinions, my understanding of, because my dissertation was on photography and death and nuclear war.
Right.
Nuclear war, which is, quite a big subject, but, it was kind of, finding the sources which spoke to that, and then, finding my voice to link it all together using this colour coding system of just putting stuff, all in one place, but separating it, and then I could start to kind of put it together into a coherent.
I see. So
essay.
when you had to then start writing commentary on the subject, you've got your colour code. So whatever that particular part of the subject is, you go, well, I know I want to talk about red now. So I'm going to go there and I'm going to get my references and I'm going to... It's interesting. So it's actually just a structure to organise the thoughts onto the page.
Yeah.
Otherwise, is it just that there's so many different thoughts you can't...
Yeah, it's like my brain is working quicker than my ability to write or to organise.
Right.
So my brain is constantly going ahead. I'm ADHD, dyspraxic. It's like my brain is constantly going ahead of what I'm doing. So writing is really difficult because my brain's somewhere else already. It's gone, why haven't you written? It's like a conversation. Haven't you written that yet? I'm already thinking about this.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So it was kind of, it gave me anchors to keep me, hooked into what I was doing right now. And then, I could come back when my brain was doing that. I could come back and go, I'm just doing the blue bits now. I'm just... I'm not.
And how does that play out in day-to-day life?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I've just applied because I'm taking on a role now. I'm part of Kindred Studios, which is it's a charity. It's artist studios in West London, and we're expanding. We're moving into new buildings, and I'm going to be running the education and the community outreach parts of that, which is great. I've got so many ideas and so many, practical skills in order to develop and deliver that. But it means a lot of admin, and that for me is a struggle. So I've just applied for support around that role through Access to Work, which is government funding that you can access if you're a disabled person, whether that's a neurodivergence or a physical disability or a sensory impairment. If you need support at work, you can you can get it. So, I've just applied for that to help me with this role, because the admin part of it is a nightmare for me.
And then when you're doing your photography and the creative element, does the head go quiet?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's in flow, is it?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why I love it.
Yeah.
It's that's what drugs and alcohol gave me, was that piece, and I needed that, and I needed to find something which replaced it, and for me, sitting still and meditating, I do try and do that as well, but it's difficult for me. But moving meditation like Qigong or something like that, and, a physical activity which puts me in flow, that's perfect, because it's, it's occupying part of my brain enough, to quieten it down.
Yeah. What advice would you give people who have no experience at all with everything you've just explained, and because I'm assuming, for example, there's 200 odd people in this office. I don't know what the stats are, but I'm assuming there'll be some people that will be struggling with an element of what you're talking about. We know for a fact there'll be people that will be struggling with mental health. They're just the stats. But specifically into what you're talking about, what would the advice be as to how you begin to try and understand or manage, or not manage might be the wrong word, just extend patience and an element of compassion to get the best out of the person? What would those things look like?
I don't know. I think, for me, what's been really important is recognising what my strengths are first.
Right.
It's just like, I know what I'm good at, and I know that I can bring value to things. I know that now. I didn't know that, but I do now. And it's like, once I know that, it's like, okay, in order to do that, what are the bits that I find difficult? What are the bits that are gonna be the barriers to me getting there to deliver that, that value? And get support with those, in whatever form that takes, whether that is going down the route of trying to get a diagnosis, or what, you don't even need that these days. I think, it's just, there's, because the waiting lists are so long, etc. I think it's just, researching what support is out there and maybe find what works for you. I have like visual timers, I have kind of grounding techniques, So when, when I'm losing, when I'm sort of, I call it sort of, I'm fragmenting, in a situation, I've got ways that I can bring myself back together.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And when you found your strength, how did you do that?
I think just through trying things out, because, recovery was like being clean. It was like a blank page. I used to visualize every day like a blank canvas. I didn't know what I was good at. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know what I didn't like. You know what I mean? So it was a kind of a process of, trying things out. So I volunteered, and then I got some work experience, and then I end up in a career. And I think through that I found out what I was good at. I'm a good communicator.
Right.
I'm a big picture thinker. I can piece things together, where other people don't notice the connections and how things might, work in a bigger way. So I ended up as a project manager, which I hated because it's a lot of admin, but I was good at some of it. I was good at the communication, the relationship building, and the kind of and the big picture thinking. I was just really bad at the
detail. Yeah. Well, that's why we're all different, so we can all fit together, one.
Yeah.
So what about failure? Because the reason I raise that is if we're usually a bar to success, from my experience, was fear of failure, 100%. And that won't be unique to me, of course it won't. It's a natural thing. When you're trying lots of new things, whether or not you want to be promoted in your current role, whether or not you want to pivot careers, whatever it is, it's going to involve an element of trying and stepping out. How did you navigate that fear of failure, or did you have that fear of failure, and how did it manifest?
I mean, completely. I had, crippling fear of failure and crippling fear of success. So it was like, because success, it almost is more terrifying because that brings responsibility.
Yeah.
So for me, using drugs, being homeless, was the ultimate kind of relinquishing of responsibility. Nobody expected anything of me at that point in my life.
Yeah.
So then, when I started to build up, you know, a life again, it's like suddenly people have expectations of me, and that's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's like I'm going to let them down. You know, I might be able to do this for a while. You know, I'd have imposter syndrome in every situation. You know, so they're going to find out. Somebody's going to come along and go, you know what, John, you know, get out. You know, we've worked out who you really are. Yeah. You know, it's like that. So it's kind of, both those things could be crippling. And I guess, you know, how did I move through it was just with a bit of faith, you know, kind of a bit of, 12-step programs, you know, offering kind of a way to really understand that, you know, what, you know, to think about what would be the worst thing that could happen here. Yeah. If I go and do this public speaking thing, you know, if I come on this podcast and I completely dry up and it's a nightmare, what's the worst that can happen, you know? Yeah. And like run those scenarios ahead, you know, and just take it a day at a time, you know. I haven't got to worry about all the things that I would do tomorrow or next week. You know, I'm just doing that. Yeah. Turn up and take care of, you know, what the day, you know, brings really. Yeah. And again, going back to that idea of you never know what's around the corner. You know, the thing that I'm worrying about on Friday might get cancelled. You know what I mean? So, like, you know, just turn up where you're supposed to be. You know, that's one of the best bits of advice anybody ever gave me. It's just like, just turn up to where you're supposed to be each day and do your best. That's it, you know. Yeah. And you know, and the rest of it will unfold. You know.
It's amazing how that simplicity carries so much weight and currency. You know, because what I'm taking from what you're saying is, well, you did it by trying. Because of course you can get so stuck in the debate that you just don't try. Yeah. You know, and action brings about change, which is a saying you'll be familiar with, and it's so true. And oftentimes we can get stuck in a rut because we're just not trying. But by trying, of course, you're getting new data and you're learning and you're going past that boundary again and again, and then before you know it, things have changed.
Yeah, I think, you know, with my mindset, you know, it was like I can't do anything unless I'm going to do it well. But so I needed to learn that in order to get good at something, I have to do it badly. You can't do anything without doing it badly first. You know, you're never going to step out onto the football pitch and be, you know, Messi for the first time, or, you know, or the greatest photographer. You know, the first time you pick up a camera, you've got to do it badly, and you've got to learn. And, you know, and that's kind of, again, that was one of the most important things I learned. You know, even dating, you know, I'd never dated sober. You know, I'd never been on a date, you know, without a drink or drug inside me, so had to do it badly. Believe me, I did it badly. So relate. It's like, you know,
it's but that's a really, really good piece of advice though. If you're going to do it, it's first do it badly, because you've got to work through it, haven't you? And I guess that's where the support systems around you come into play, because we all need a bit of help every now and then to pick us up. Yeah. So it's a huge part of it. I'm mindful of time, so just two last questions. More of a kind of reflection, which I always ask everyone. One is, if you were talking to your younger self now, that 13-year-old boy, what words of advice or support would you give him?
It's difficult because, you know, I think almost like, you know, destiny was unfolding the way it was unfolding. I don't feel like, you know, I could have stopped myself becoming an addict or, you know, or ending up, you know, in trouble. But what I could have done, I guess, is just, you know, it's just, you know, when I look at photos of my 13-year-old self, and there's not many, but there's a few, I just think, you know, he's a nice kid, you know, a nice, you know, not unattractive, not particularly weird, you know, kid who was just trying to navigate life. And I'd sort of have that conversation with myself and just say, you know, you're all right. Yeah. Just talk to that girl. Just do that thing. Because I was, I was terrified. And it's like, you know, alcohol, you know, to begin with, just broke the shackles off, and it allowed me to do the things that I just felt incapable of doing. You know, it was like, so it would be just, you know, just try those things. Just try and talk to people. What, you know, embarrassment can't kill you. Yeah. You know, you know, because that was kind, you know, it was almost like I believed that, you know, you could die from embarrassment. You could die from being humiliated. you know,
Yes.
and that's not true, you know.
Yeah.
You just feel a bit awkward and a bit uncomfortable, and then you get up and get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know?
it's getting to the other side. I never used to get to the other side of those emotions, which, similar to you, alcohol was a big crutch for me. So rather than get to the other side of it to know that,
Yeah.
let's just have a drink. And there's that saying, you know, alcohol gave me wings and then it took away the sky.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And that's a very similar thing that I experienced. But again, it's courage, isn't it? It's almost like you're describing. Have some courage that it will be.
Yeah,
It'll
and that
be
courage isn't the absence of fear. You know, courage is
correct. Yeah.
feeling fear, feeling awkward, like, you know, most 13-year-olds do.
Yeah.
They're just giving it a go.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and it's not life or death. You know, I felt like it was life or death. You know, getting things wrong, embarrassing myself, humiliating myself. You know, it felt like that was life or death. It's not.
Yeah.
It's just a kid awkwardly trying to bumble through life. you know?
Yeah. And then final question, similar, but I guess to invert it, if you were in a room full of 100 people as yourself today, what would you say to them? What one bit of advice or learnings would you pass forward to them?
Yeah. You never know what's around the corner, good, bad, or indifferent. You know, you never know. You can't often predict, you know, we often predict, you know, our future based on, you know, today or yesterday, and actually, you know, that isn't very, it's not a very accurate gauge of, you know, what's coming. You know, COVID-19 was a big example of that. We suddenly found ourselves, you know, in a very, very different situation than we all imagined that summer, you know. So, you know, you never know what's around the corner. And I think, you know, a piece of advice that I'm still trying to give to myself, because I struggle with this every day, if you're struggling with something, you haven't got enough help. It's not that, you know, you're not good enough or, you know, it's not possible. It's just you haven't got enough help.
Yeah, which is a really good bit of advice, actually, as a barometer. It's got nothing to do with you and how broken you are or unable. You just don't have enough help. Yeah. That's amazing. I could talk to you all day, but that's time. Thanks so much, Jon, for coming.